One thing is immutable. Death on Azeroth is inevitable. For some, it will come sooner than anticipated. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and come, take a seat in the shadows. Medivh is dead. The Guardian has fallen. All that is left now is to inform King Llane. That is precisely what Garona and Khadgar intend to do. They hurry to Stormwind to inform His Majesty that he should not expect help from the Guardian of Azeroth, and they were at last alone in this war. But something is wrong, however. Garona, still shaken from the terrible visions she had seen in Karazhan, she was shown she would betray one of the men who accepted her for what she really was. This thought terrified her, more than words could express. But when she was but for a moment alone with the king, she could not control herself. Through her daggers, Gul'dan had commanded her to betray her allies. This suggestion flared up in her mind now, and she reluctantly plunged the dagger into Llane and proceeded to cut out his heart. Varian, the king's son, witnessed the act, but he could never understand why Garona would have tears streaming down her face. But Garona, after fleeing back to the Horde, did not get the hero's welcome one might expect. Blackhand was dead, and Ogrim Doomhammer had taken control in Gul'dan's absence. He had launched an attack against the Blackrock Mountain and the Shadow Council, killing almost all of the warlocks that resided there. He did, however, spare Gul'dan's life, despite knowing that later he may regret this fateful choice. But he would be a powerful tool in the coming battles. While the cunning old warlock would bow to the whims of this new leader, he would enact many of his own plans in secret, choosing to bide his time. Ogrim seized on the disorder of the humans in Stormwind. Lothar and his men were still journeying back from Karazhan, hoping to save their glorious kingdom. Instead, when they returned, they found only smoke and ruins. Stormwind had fallen. All that was left was to gather what refugees he could and set sail along the western coast. They would flee to Lordaeron to warn them of what was to come. But the Horde, despite being under new leadership and seemingly free from the Shadow Council, would still commit acts too monstrous for most to come to terms with. The Necrolites had long studied the dark arts of necromancy. With so many souls once loyal to Gul'dan going to waste, he saw the perfect opportunity. The bodies of the fallen knights of Stormwind were gathered, and then using the darkest of magics, reanimated. The souls of the fallen Shadow Council were then placed inside these abominations, often hideous and cruel. These were the first Death Knights Azeroth would ever see. Wielding terrible magics, these servants of undeath were a true nightmare to behold. The Horde's power was growing, but in secret, Gul'dan continued to solidify his own position. He created a clan in his own name as the Storm Reavers, and with the aid of his greatest apprentice, Cho'Gall, they created a place of power named the Altar of Storms. They used it to create two-headed ogre magi from those most loyal to Gul'dan. The Horde itself continued its push northward, reaching the lands of Dun Morogh, and in a series of successful campaigns conquered the icy wastes, forcing their occupants to seal themselves within their respective cities. While they would be safe for now, they were also trapped within. Lothar had reached the safety of Lordaeron and called for a council of the 7 human nations. They debated long and hard about what to do against the coming tide of orcs. No one nation could stand alone now, and every day that passed they only grew in strength. It was resolved at this moment they would band together and found the Alliance of Lordaeron. They would not stop here. Word had spread of how the priests of the Holy Light had fared on the front lines. While these priests lacked any real martial training, they did prove themselves formidable, and their ability to heal the wounded proved a powerful boon in their engagements. The current leader of the Holy Church, Archbishop Alonsus Fowl, came to Lothar with a plan. He would take the most noble soldiers, men who embodied the best of humanity. They would be trained in traditional warfare, alongside being taught to wield the light. They would be the Alliance's natural leaders. Loyalty, bravery, honor. These men were the finest the Seven Kingdoms had to offer. Fowl gathered his newly named paladins and gifted to each of them a holy librum. They were instructed to become a living embodiment of the teachings within. Turalyon was given the librum of protection, Uther the librum of justice, Tyrion the librum of retribution, Sidon the librum of holiness, and Gavinrad would be the librum of compassion. These first paladins adopted the now ancient symbol of the Silver Hand, one that had been passed down for countless generations from the ancient days of humanity's first steps. As the Order of the Silver Hand prepared to engage in their first battle, another ancient power would sense the disturbance happening in the world above. The black dragon aspect Deathwing dwelled now in the deep places of the world. Long had he brooded, being twisted by the madness of the old gods. He could not control the demon soul any longer, but he could make sure it fell into the hands of those who could. Sensing an opportunity, he used his power to send dark visions of this powerful artifact into the mind of an orcish warlock. These visions showed the path, and his clan of orcs would follow, eventually finding the device that would emanate with a dark and terrifying magic. The Queen of the Dragons and aspect of the Red Flight Alexstrasza would sense something and come to investigate. The wards and the device were broken, and the artifact missing. The Red Dragons mobilized to hunt down the orcs, eventually engaging them at Khazmodan. But Deathwing had long since sent visions to the Warlock disciple on how to wield it. Necros unleashed the power instantly, placing the Queen in magical fetters. The Red Flight could not disobey now, or risk the safety of their beloved aspect. The Orc clan renamed themselves to the Dragonmaw clan, and would work on breaking the will of the Red Flight, learning more and more each day on how to use them as another terrible weapon in the arsenal of the Horde. This interlude saw the forces on both sides of this conflict swell by necessity. Lothar would invoke an ancient pact for the first time. He would call upon the aid of the Kalderae. Honor-bound, the High Elves came from the city of Silvermoon to offer what they could to this alliance. Ogrim, however, had spent much time building a fleet, one which he could use to sail to the Hillsbrad foothills and avoid the deadly location of the Thandal Splan. He knew that he could not risk his forces becoming trapped in such a location. As the ships set sail, they met heavy resistance from the sea-hardened Kultiran fleet and were hopelessly outmatched. This battle marked a turning point, a resurgence in the warring forces. But while defeat looked inevitable for the Orcs, they unleashed for the first time their horrific new weapon. Red dragons smashed against the human fleet and forced their immediate withdrawal to not suffer more losses. This allowed the Horde to make landfall. They had at last reached the northern lands. The Alliance had nowhere left to run. This would be their final stand. All across the land, major battles were taking place. The Order of the Silver Hand and its newly trained paladins engaged the Death Knights and proved their equal in every way. This would not be so easy now. Both sides were relentless. But the Horde would wash over this land like a tide. They accepted any who would pledge themselves to their cause. The Amani trolls would eagerly take this deal, for the first time since the days of the ancient firestorm, they began to reclaim their ancestral lands of the Eversong Woods from the elves. With the Horde's might, they pushed the elves all the way back to Silvermoon City itself, but they could not breach the walls or its magical barrier, no matter how much they tried. Ogrim would call his forces back, not willing to expend so much manpower on what he saw as a non-priority target. This drew the ire of the Amani, however. Without the Horde, they had no hope of holding the recently reclaimed lands, knowing the elves vastly outmatched them. Zul'jin, their leader, who had spent much time in captivity of the humans, grew to hate the Horde for this act. He would never forgive them. The eve of the final battle had eventually come. This conflict had been long and bloody, but here they stood, about to siege the lands of Lothar, where the human alliance would make their final stand. Being in remarkably good shape, however, despite the recent engagement, in no small part due to the new Paladin order. Gul'dan, however, could care less about this war, or the humans. He had finally learned the true location of what he sought most. He took his Stormreaver clan, the Death Knights and the Twilight Hammer, and abandoned the Horde on the eve of battle. He set sail out into the ocean. He would use his mighty power to raise an ancient structure from the depths of the sea. As the humongous fell-tainted building rose from the ocean floor, it was now clear that this was the tomb of Sargeras, and Gul'dan believed his destiny awaited within. Once he breached the tomb, however, a throng of demons swarmed from its darkness, tearing the warlock and almost all of his forces apart in a bloody frenzy. With these sudden losses, Ogrim and the Horde had been betrayed to their ruin. The war they were once winning was now all but over. The humans were regrouping and were about to press their advantage. They would have to flee. But what happens next will have to wait for the next episode. For now, thank you so much to everyone for all the support. Oh, and don't forget to come back anytime.